Hi, folks. Today I'll cover in Lecture 4 the final three chapters of The Shallows. Don't forget that by 10 p.m. tomorrow night, June 28th, your car book review is due. Please do submit that via Canvas. Don't email that to me as a PDF or as a Word doc. I need those uploaded to Canvas. If you're not familiar with Canvas, just go to our course Canvas home site here and click Assignments and then Cars Book Review and then the Submit Assignment button. Hit Browse, attach your file, and Submit Assignment, and you should get a notification that it was uploaded successfully. Okay, on to Cars Chapter 8. We'll start there. Now, I should mention, in the various lectures I'm offering, right, I'm just focusing on the main claims. It's important to discuss those main claims in your book review to give the reader an overall sense of the argument being made over the 10 chapters. But that's not to say you should only discuss the main claims, right? There's a robust, wide variety of claims and concepts and ideas that Carr is raising in this book, and I hope you'll engage them, as you see fit. All I'm saying with the main claims is simply don't let your discussion of other claims eclipse your coverage of the main claim. But with an assignment of this length that you're turning in for the book review, you'll have time to do both, right? You'll have time to discuss the claims as well, the main claims via deep reading, as well as what you see as kind of secondary claims or illustrative claims to these main claims. So anyhow, Chapter 8, Church of Google. It seems to me Carr has a twofold criticism of Google, and I offer you a suggested main claim in my own language here, right? He opens by situating Google within a Taylor management philosophy. Okay, and so Taylorism was a 19th and early 20th century industrial management philosophy that became very popular, primarily in manufacturing industrial sectors, but now it's moved on into the 20th, 21st centuries into other sectors of business practices. Okay, and Taylorism focuses on things like measurement, repetition, and efficiency. Okay, and so the classic example of where Taylor management philosophy would work well, or has worked well historically, is in manufacturing lines, factory lines, where the Taylor experts would come in and understand the very best way to complete some task in the manufacturing of whatever product was being sold. There would be kind of one right way to do it, right? One right way to bend down and lift a heavy sack of material and move it somewhere else. One right way to attach a rear view mirror to a car. And this was the kind of thinking. So they would do kind of labor measurements. They would also then, in doing so, and there was finding one right way of doing things, then the goal was just to do that repetitively. And in doing so, you could get fast at it and get even more and more efficient. And so, with the same staffing, increase your output. Okay, so that's kind of a brief discussion of Taylorism, the three elements of Taylorism, and you'll see Carr discuss that in the opening of the book. And so, what Carr thinks is right that Google, which is our main interface with the web, right? That Google is the latest instantiation or latest manifestation of this Taylor philosophy. Now, a question for all of you to consider, and you may raise it in your book review, is Taylorism, which emerged out of an industrial economy, relevant, advised for an information economy, which we now live in? Okay, that's something I'll just leave for you to consider. But Carr thinks Google has adopted Taylorism 100%, and he claims that Google is therefore promoting distraction in two different ways. Number one, Google operates on a pay-per-click business model, right? So the reader, typically, in Carr's mind, the ideal reader is reading for knowledge. They're reading to slowly read and understand a web page. High reading comprehension, high memory of the material. They might even stop and ponder the material, apply it to their own lives in their mind, and then continue reading. These are not the interests of Google, right? Google is motivated, has a profit motive based on how often we click a link on the page, right? And so that pay per click business model is, I think, important in Carr's argument because it shows how Google is motivating users to behave. Okay, so Google doesn't want us sitting and reading a single website for 10 minutes and understanding it and applying it to our lives and taking notes on it and writing it in a journal. No, they want us to click off of that page very quickly onto the next page. And then on that page, click a link within that page to onto another multimodal page, video, song, whatever. And so Carr thinks that kind of just baked into the cake of Google is distraction because of this first criticism. The second criticism I hope you'll read about, which Carr discusses in the second half of the chapter, is Google has this kind of what they call the moonshot, this their big plan to digitize all books. So the question is, right, what's Carr's criticism with it? What's the problem with digitizing all books? Why is Carr criticizing this? And Carr's answer, to some degree, right, is that by digitizing books, you've now allowed people to dismember those books. And I call it discretizing books. Discretizing means to break things into smaller, discrete units. So back in the day, in Carr's day, when you would read a book in hard copy or in paper form, um, you would more typically read it linearly from start to finish, or at least a chapter or a section from start to finish. And in doing so, you would kind of have the larger context of the text in mind as you're reading individual statements. And so, as you know, right, when you read something well or you read something on paper, you take time and sit down with something, right? There's a kind of context. You're not picking and choosing sentences here and there to pull out of the text. You're reading in a kind of information ecology. And so what Carr is worried about is that when these texts, all these books around the world are digitized, they're now searchable. And so now people are simply using find tools, right? Find the term you want to find. And in kind of dismembering a larger organism of the book into just discrete information bits, Carr thinks we're losing a lot. We're moving from interpreting a text for meaning to kind of superficially decoding a text for bite-sized pieces of information. And that's something, you can respond to that. And this is a place where in the review, you have to close your review by responding with your own evaluative kind of reaction to Carr's argument, right? I mean, do you find yourself doing that when you need to write a text, when you need to write a paper, I don't know, in a philosophy class, let's say you need to write on Aristotle's virtue ethics, what Aristotle meant by virtue or something, right? Do you go through the text on Kindle or on the web and search for the 50 times Aristotle uses the term virtue and kind of just read around that term and get a sense of what Aristotle meant and maybe copy and paste one or two of Aristotle's sentences into a paper and cite it, you know? If you do, you're falling prey to Carr's criticism. Or do you, when you need to write a paper on the notion of virtue in one of Aristotle's texts, do you kind of sit down with those texts, read them in full, understand the deeper meanings of Aristotle's notion of virtue, which might come up in places where he's not even using the actual term virtue, right? And if you are doing that deeper ecological, context-based meaning interpretation, then I'd say you've got something to counter Carr's argument with. And so that's something for you to consider. Do you think Carr is right? Is he accurately predicting our own reading and writing behavior? And so I think that's really the heart of this chapter is understanding his twofold criticism. There are a lot of great kind of quotes that go along with this main theme, and I've offered two on this page. I think another issue that we'll get to in the next chapter is this notion of, Carr opened the book with this notion of kind of skimming across the top of a text, sort of like a jet skier, instead of the deep dive. And he's coming back to that kind of metaphor now in chapter 8 with his discussion, as you can see in the two quotes I've offered here. Okay, and that skimming is associated with a lack of sustained attention to the text at hand, and it's a very different approach to a text. You're skimming for bits of information rather than reading slowly for contextual meaning. And that works as a good segue to chapter 9. Let's see, I offer. Oh, we'll come back. This other quote I have here. Um, oh, I should mention this here. Another criticism you might have if you're thinking of how to evaluate Carr's text, you might ask yourself, if you're looking for ideas on what to think about for yourself, is to what degree does Carr offer a solution to what he sees as this mess, right? I mean, the internet's not going away, the web is not going away, and yet he thinks it's severely chipping away at our ability to concentrate, to think, to remember. So what's his answer? It's a question for you. Does he have an answer? I'll say I'll offer this quote as the kind of the beginning of a place where he might start to offer an answer. And I'll leave my own opinion on his answer later. I'll see what you all write about. But he does mention in chapter 8 that there needs to be time for efficient data collection, and that's that Taylorism, right? That's that kind of quick hunting and pecking and searching and skimming texts for particular pieces of information. There needs to be time for that in the modern life. But he claims that there also needs to be time for inefficient contemplation, right? And then he uses the two metaphors that he's been drawing on through the text: time to operate the machine, time to sit idly in the garden. And so that's kind of the germ of what he might offer as a balanced approach to the modern information economy. And I'll leave the rest of that for your discernment in the essay you're writing. So now on to chapter 9. Again, there's a lot going on in chapter 9. This is where Carr dives into some of the neuroscience and psychobiology of memory and comprehension. But I'll just, again, in my role, simply point out the main claim. And it's a pretty vital one for Carr's argument, right? So he argues from scientific research that it takes a certain amount of time on task, right? Concentrating on a particular task, whether that's reading and thinking about an idea or performing some manual task, right? But it takes a certain amount of concentrative time for the adult brain to transfer knowledge or an experience or an episode, whatever you're focused on, to transfer that from short-term memory to long-term memory. And this is a genetic neurophysiological process, right? This is a case of genes being activated and proteins being manufactured. It takes that to transfer experiences from short-term to long-term memory. And the second part of that is, and that process is wildly enhanced when the individual already has a schema to attach the new knowledge. What is a schema? A schema is a kind of cognitive outline or skeleton you already have for an idea. So if you already know something about a domain of knowledge and you have it structured in your mind, let's say maybe you know something about, say, Niagara University's campus, right? You have a mental model of Niagara University's campus right now. So if I say, oh, I was standing over by the river, I was standing over by, looking at Canada, you could easily situate me within that campus map, right? And so that's an example of you taking a new piece of information and adding it to my schema, okay? Adding it to your schema, I'm sorry, because you know something about in you. If I said that about, say, University of Pittsburgh, and you don't know anything about University of Pittsburgh, not only will you not know what I'm saying, but you're less likely to remember that fact because you don't have a schema to attach it to, okay? And so Carr is saying you need both. To develop a rich long-term memory, you need time on task thinking about the thing, and you need a schema to attach it to. And he's saying with online reading, we have neither. We're simply not spending enough time on any one idea to allow it to effectively transfer from short-term to long-term memory. Okay? And when we're reading around in a discretized kind of haphazard fashion for just bits of information, we're not really developing an organized schema in the first place to attach new knowledge to. So he's arguing, right, that this is where the linear mind, as opposed to the networked mind, has a significant advantage. That the linear mind, if you're reading slowly and well, offers a kind of organization, most texts you're reading offer a larger organizational scheme that could work as a schema, and you're reading slowly and in a fashion that allows you to, or you're motivated at least, to be reading more slowly to allow your body to transfer that reading knowledge to the long-term memory. So that's vital, right? That's vital to his work. And secondary matters, many secondary claims throughout the piece. Now, a question for all of you um, would be, how important is memory? And it seems strange from people in my generation to even ask the question, but people in younger generations are, right? Carr's arguing, so there's this idea that, well, we might not need memory as much anymore because we've farmed it out to our technological devices. I can always Google up something. I can always have these immense, supercomputers in my pocket to refer to. Okay, so if you're going to make the case that, yeah, we don't need memory, that we can just turn to our devices to find the information we need, that's fine. But it still doesn't answer, in my opinion at least, the question of how is your knowledge schematized, right? Because if you're just hunting and pecking for bits of information, it's unlikely you will have digested them in an organized fashion that works well for you. Enough said there. Okay. So that's chapter 9. I hope that helps you sort of see the big picture. And so as you're reading throughout the history of science in this chapter, you're not losing track of his end game here. Chapter 10 is where Carr kind of brings it all together. It's not a very research heavy chapter. It's more of a place of speculation, I think, and pondering. And so I'm not going to cover it because I want to see what sense you make of this chapter. All I'll say is it seems to me he's broadening beyond just concerns, just like academic concerns of concentration and memory. He's really asking a question, right, about the larger question of humanity, of what it means to be human, and the degree to which our online dependencies are changing those elements of what it means to be human. And so I'll close here with just a question for you to consider as you read this chapter and ideally as you write your paper, which is, in Carr's mind, right, what essential parts of ourselves does Carr think we might be losing in our uncritical dependence on the web? And I think if you read chapter 10 with that in mind, you'll see his answer, right? Don't get hung up on ELIZA, the computer program that was, kind of sensational for quite some time. I think he has it. The ELIZA computer program speaks to this larger claim he's making, and that claim is larger than just a question of how well we learn. It's a question, I think, of what it means to be human. That's all I have to say about Carr's text. Again, I'm available on email, over the phone, on campus if you want to discuss the matter. Be sure to submit your Carr book review on time. And then next week we'll turn to Pennebaker and Smythe's first text. Thanks, everybody.